What is going on, y'all? Welcome to another edition of the Liberty Cast, and I'm your host, Big E. Obviously, there is a lot going on in the news this week. A lot is changing by the hour, by the minute. As I was preparing for the show and doing my last minute prep, things started coming in that I'm like, I got to talk about that. I got to talk about this. So the flow of the show might be a bit janky this week. But it's because there's so much information that we want to make sure we get in here. And even though we're not a news show, we don't do breaking news, but this is important. So obviously, we're going to talk about the death of George Floyd, the riots that ensued in Minneapolis, and then all across the country. And we'll also get into the inevitable turn toward the false narrative that this is a racist country and that the police are targeting, hunting, and executing black men. And we will do our best to debunk that. We'll also get into the president's ongoing feud with social media and his latest salvo. And the left proves once again, and we'll get into this, that they are the children sitting at the adults' table. Now it's going to be a loaded show, so let's just go ahead and hit it. What happened to George Floyd was murder. Now, I know that the autopsy has come in and he had an underlying health condition that exacerbated the effects of what the cops were doing to him. That doesn't mitigate the fact that they did this to him, and he likely would have survived the encounter if they had not kneeled on his neck. And we'll get into this later, but two or three other officers were kneeling on the rest of his body, but you couldn't see that in the most popular camera angle that everybody has seen. Now, there's no evidence yet that I've seen that suggests that the cop who has been charged with the murder of George Floyd is a racist. I know that there are massive efforts to push that narrative, but what I can tell you is that he was a bad cop, and he needs to be held accountable for the death of George Floyd. Now, he was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. Those charges could change. I know everyone's all pissed off that he was only charged with third-degree murder. Third-degree murder is a big deal. It carries a maximum sentence of 25 years. But again, those charges could change depending on how the investigation progresses. Charges can be amended, added, things of that nature. Now, if you noticed, I haven't used his name, and I'm not going to use the officer's name. But again, he was a bad cop. Kneeling on a suspect's neck is not a technique that any police officer is taught to use to subdue a suspect. But here's the thing. In the heat of the moment, when a cop is wrestling with a suspect, when things go sideways, what sometimes happens in those situations, the training just doesn't have a chance to kick in, and you have to do whatever you have to do to survive the encounter. I get that. That was not this. That was absolutely not this. Because by the time this happened, Floyd was already in custody. I know that there was this issue where he didn't want to get in the vehicle and things of that nature. He was still in handcuffs and not a threat. In any of the videos that you look at, he was compliant for the most part, didn't kick, punch, bite, spit, nothing like that. And as I pointed out earlier, it turns out that 3 of the 4 cops were kneeling on him. The one that's been charged with murder, 2 others. There was a 4th cop who was supposedly there for crowd control. He seemed pretty useless on the video that I saw. In fact, I don't think he even looked in Floyd's direction the entire time. But Floyd was in cuffs and on the ground, proned out. I would love to hear an explanation from the former officer who did this. I would love to hear an explanation as to why he thought this was a good idea. What his reasoning was for using this type of technique. Where did he learn it? And why, when Floyd himself was pleading, telling everybody he couldn't breathe, asking for water, asking for his mother, or when the crowd was telling him to let him up, his nose was bleeding, he couldn't breathe, he was in custody and handcuffed. Nothing about this makes a lick of sense. It was a senseless killing, and George Floyd and his family deserve justice. Now, what happened afterwards, and the acts of violence, the looting, the rioting that is continuing to happen, is not the way to achieve it. Protests are one thing. Marches in the streets, legally armed citizens marching on the police station, city hall, state capitol, peacefully demanding justice, holding up signs, chanting, I get all of that. All of that is justified. All of that is legal. Looting, breaking windows, destroying stores, burning out stores, burning out the police station. None of that accomplishes what you claim to be the ultimate goal. And now it turns out that 80% of the people arrested in Minneapolis were from outside of Minneapolis. And there's evidence to suggest that this was a coordinated attempt to stir unrest. And there was no need for it, because everyone, all across the political spectrum, I haven't met or heard anyone say that this was justified. I haven't met or heard anyone say that the death of George Floyd was just an unfortunate byproduct of good policing. Nobody has said that. Nobody in their right mind has said that. Everybody was on your side. But as soon as you start destroying stores, setting fires, burning down a police station, destroying Target, hammering the cash drawers, trying to get the cash out, as soon as you lost everybody. This was a full-blown riot. And there are actually some people, some leftists, who are justifying burning down the city. And the only thing rioting and looting does is take the focus away from where it should be, and that is justice for George Floyd and his family. If you look at videos of the city early morning the next day, it looks like a war zone. They could have Chironed that video Libya, Syria, anywhere in the Middle East after an attack, and everybody would have believed it, because that's what it looked like. Burned out cars, ash in the air, graffiti on the buildings, windows broken, buildings burnt down. It's insane. And now we have protests erupting all over the country. Atlanta, Columbus, Ohio, Denver, Colorado, Louisville, Kentucky, Utah, of all places. And of course, Texas. George Floyd is a native of Houston, so things kind of got out of hand in Houston. But Governor Abbott has a pretty good handle on things. He dispatched the National Guard pretty quickly. Unfortunately, that did not stop a gang of a-holes from beating a store owner in Dallas within an inch of his life. And it's things like that that end up having the opposite effect of what the alleged goal is. And when you look at places that have suffered through riots, it takes years to recover, decades even. And people who own businesses in those areas may never be able to reopen. Look at Ferguson. Many Black-owned small businesses just closed down. They were not able to get back in business. And this is supposed to be about racial inequality and police brutality against Black people. You claim to want justice for Black folks, and then destroy the businesses of hardworking Black men and women? Is there any remorse, or is it just the price that everyone has to pay for your voice to be heard? Collateral damage in your made-up war? And yes, I said made up because there is absolutely no data validating claims that the police are targeting black men disproportionately. And we will get to that in a second. Because first, before we get into that, I want to talk about the reports of Antifa thugs and Black Lives Matter and other out-of-town activists paid for by George Soros. I get the whole never let a tragedy go to waste mantra. I get that. That's baked into the cake at this point. But even for them, I don't see what this accomplishes. Because you lose all credibility by rioting and looting. Unless this is just some long game ploy to try and smear the president with this so that he doesn't win re-election in November. Maybe that's the game. I shouldn't use the word game because it's not a game at all. At least not to me and not to those of us who actually are taking this seriously. But something else that I've seen play out this week and in the wake of this is the comparison between these riots and protesters in Michigan and elsewhere who happen to be armed. That these people either cannot see or refuse to see the difference is mystifying. The mental gymnastics that must go into that kind of twisted logic is insane. The armed protesters in Michigan and in Virginia and elsewhere broke no laws. They destroyed nary a business, broke not one window, burned down exactly 0 police stations, threw no rocks or other objects at police vehicles, threatened no one with a gun. How you compare the two with a straight face is beyond me. I don't get it. And I saw it play out a lot. Because the difference to anyone with a couple of brain cells to rub together is striking. And then look at how the protesters in Michigan left the city and compare that to the war zone that is now Minneapolis or Atlanta or any of the other places where violence broke out. Ridiculous. All right, you know what? We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to circle back to the narrative, the race narrative that I mentioned earlier. So we will see you on the other side. This narrative that they are desperately pushing, that the police are hunting down and killing black men, unarmed black men, is simply not true. It has no basis in fact or reality whatsoever. There are numerous studies that show this. A study released in August of 2019 by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showed that the police do not disproportionately target black people or Hispanics. What they actually found was that the racial makeup of the community where the police officers are working and the rate of violent crime determined the race of the suspect that was shot. So a cop in a high crime area with a high percentage of Hispanics is likely to shoot a Hispanic person in a violent confrontation. A high crime black neighborhood, a cop is more likely to shoot a black person. In a high crime white neighborhood, a cop is more likely to shoot a white person. It seems kind of silly to me that we need a study to show us this, but here we are. There was another study by Roland Fryer, a professor of economics at Harvard University, whose work in fields of education, inequality, race, things of that nature, have been widely cited by media and in congressional testimony. And right now he's focusing on police use of force. And what Fryer found was that in an interaction with police, there are no racial differences in officer-involved shootings on either the extensive or intensive margins, which is to say whether or not an officer decides to shoot, or did the officer discharge the weapon before or after the suspect attacked. Now, after controlling for demographic variables between the suspects and officers and characteristics of the encounter, Black folks are 27.4% less likely to be shot by police relative to non-Black or non-Hispanic suspects. Now, one would think that a Black professor at Harvard would be in his best interest to have his findings fit the narrative that the leftists are pushing. This could very well get Professor Fryer voted off the island. Now, arguably, the worst, definitely one of, if not the worst, police shooting in recent memory is the shooting of Daniel Shaver. Now, if you don't know who that is, you'd be forgiven because it didn't get anywhere near the publicity that the recent shootings or recent deaths of people like Freddie Gray or George Floyd didn't get anything close to that kind of publicity. Well, first of all, there were no riots. There was some public outrage. I mean, it did hit the news cycle. It did stay around for a little while, but not nearly to the extent that these other shootings and these other deaths have. Daniel Shaver happened to be white. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the case or not. I am. I remember I didn't remember the name, unfortunately, but when I looked it up, as soon as I saw the thumbnail image of the video, I remembered exactly what it was. And it was outrageous. And there are some people who tried to justify it, said he was reaching. Look it up for yourself. It was insane. But we're going to move on because there's a lot more I want to get to before we get you out of here. One of the things that's been bugging me lately, and I was going to talk about this last week, but things got away from me. But one of the things that's been on my mind lately is the difference between conservatives and leftists. And I know that sounds like we're going way off into left field, but trust me, we'll bring this tugboat back to shore. The differences between the way conservatives think and leftists think is pretty striking. It is the difference between the way a child thinks and the way an adult thinks. Adults, generally speaking, when they're dealing with their, well, that's not always the case, but for purposes of this discussion, we'll go with that. Conservatives are the adults in the room. They use facts, information, data. And children, the leftists, base everything off of emotion. And it's a clear difference in the thought process, to the extent that a leftist actually uses a thought process. And based on some of my interactions of late, I really have to wonder. But like children, the left looks for the instantly gratifying solution to a problem. Take mandating masks in public, for example. Most of the evidence, both empirical and anecdotal, suggests that masks are not useful in preventing the Chinese coronavirus, yet, because it makes leftists feel better, even though the quote curve is flattened, they still insist on doing it like a petulant child. Conservatives, on the other hand, have questioned the validity of wearing masks. We questioned mandating it, wanted to make sure that our constitutional rights were respected. We wanted to know that after mandating masks and being under house arrest, what was next? What was going to be the next thing that they were going to have us do? And what was going to be the next right that they chill in the name of public health? What were going to be the consequences of these decisions and these actions? Like adults, what's next? Okay, you do this. What is the consequence? What is the immediate consequence? And what's going to happen a month from now, 6 months from now, Leftists don't think that way. Look at the difference in the way the grievances were handled by conservatives and leftists. When they protested the new proposed gun laws in Virginia, the conservatives, the adults, went to their county supervisors' meetings, pushed for declaring themselves sanctuary counties, mobilized voter registrations, and now it looks like they might flip Virginia back red. When people in Michigan protested Comrade Whitmer's totalitarian response to the virus, they showed up at the Capitol, armed as is their right, and voiced their grievances. But when Freddie Gray in Baltimore died in police custody, what happened? Riots ensued. Businesses were destroyed. Livelihoods were lost. Lives were lost. And the leftist mayor's response was, just let them blow off steam. When Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, after going after Darren Wilson's gun, the hands up, don't shoot lie took hold and riots ensued. Riots based on a lie, as it turned out. Darren Wilson's life ruined. And now in Minneapolis, the children are looting Targets, burning down auto zones, destroying small businesses. A firefighter who took his life savings and put it into a sports bar because that was his dream, lost it all. He was supposed to open for business on Monday, June 1st. Gone. Did I mention that firefighter happened to be black? The premise of these riots, attempting to identify as protests, is that black people are oppressed. We're so oppressed we can't get a leg up because the police have their knees on the backs of our necks. Why go around and destroy your neighborhood, your neighbors' businesses, costing your neighbors their jobs? Because all those businesses that have been burnt out, looted, or otherwise destroyed may not come back. Now, as it turns out, we mentioned earlier that a lot of the people who were involved in these things were from out of state and not from the area. So maybe some of those people involved that we saw on the videotapes destroying Target and things like that, maybe some of them were from out of town, but some of them were from that area. There's no doubt about it. They just didn't get arrested. Chances are some of them worked at that Target. That wouldn't surprise me in the least. But they have no jobs to go to. These are the actions of children with no concept, no ability to think ahead to what the consequences might be. No thought ever given to what happens next. And many on the left are justifying these actions like the children that they are. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And when we get back, we will touch on Governor Blackface in Virginia and the consequences of one of his mandates that has gone into effect recently. We'll be right back. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's a concept that Governor Blackface, Ralph Northam, just doesn't get. Governor Blackface has issued a directive making it mandatory to wear face masks in public. He is another authoritarian spreading his communist wings with this pandemic. There's a meme floating around social media depicting a conversation between a masked fascist and a concealed carry permit holder citing a law that makes it illegal to wear a mask while carrying a gun. The person with the gun permit says, it's illegal for me to wear a mask, I'm not going to do it. Now, the law that this meme cites is, I believe, from Illinois. But Virginia has a similar law on the books. It is against the law for anyone 16 years of age or older to wear a mask in order to conceal their identity. There is a provision in the law that says that it won't apply after the declaration of a disaster or state of emergency by the governor in response to a public health emergency, where the emergency declaration expressly waives the section of the law that makes it illegal to wear a mask and defines the mask as appropriate for the emergency and provides for the duration of the waiver. I think the mask mandate has a dual intent from Governor Blackface. The law pertaining to emergency declarations does have a provision that waives the prohibition against wearing masks, but only if the governor expressly waives it in his declaration, which in this case he did not. So now concealed carry permit holders are at risk of being in violation of the law if they carry with or without a mask. If they carry with a mask, then they're in violation of that law. If they carry without a mask, well, then the law that they're breaking doesn't have anything to do with carrying a gun, obviously, but they're breaking the law by not wearing a mask. Either one in Governor Blackface's Virginia can get you jammed up, which is why I think he left it as ambiguous as he did and didn't include the mask waiver in the declaration. Because just like the rest of the authoritarians showing their butts lately, he does not want people with guns. He's made that abundantly clear. So I'm looking forward to see how this plays out. Hopefully somebody challenges this in court and before it gets to the point where a bunch of people are arrested for carrying a gun while wearing a mask. Well, hopefully this whole mask thing goes away, but barring that. But speaking of authoritarians showing their butts, last weekend, the Memorial Day weekend, Chicago saw its deadliest weekend since 2015. There's a reason they call it Chirac. Chicago is a dangerous place. Draconian gun laws notwithstanding. And of course you would think that with all those gun laws, it would be a really safe place. Just like California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland. Because all of those places are really safe as well. And obviously I'm being a bit sarcastic. There are nice places in all of those states. But anyway, listen to Superintendent Brown of the Chicago PD.
This unacceptable level of violence happened while Chicago remains under the stay-at-home order meant to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Most individuals complied with the order, and I want to thank those that stayed at home this weekend. But the stay-at-home order did little to prevent violence, particularly in the parts of the West and South Side.
You think? What was your first clue there, Dave? First clue. I mean, that was about as dumb as the mayor of Houston and his pleas to the criminals of Houston to suspend criminal activity until after we've gotten past this Chinese coronavirus. I mean, what did he think? What did he and Mayor Lightfoot think? People are tired of being cooped up. And eventually it's going to get to the point where people are just going to say, you know what? Screw it. I don't care. Screw your lockdown. You can't take us all to jail, Lightfoot. All right, we're almost out of time, so I wanted to touch on one last quick thing. This week, President Trump signed an executive order against social media platforms, and this is pretty much in response to them fact-checking him incorrectly last week, and now this week they covered up a tweet that they didn't take it down, but they covered it up saying that it was glorifying violence. And this is the tweet, quote, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you." Now, I thought that tweet was ill-advised, considering the origins of the phrase "when the looting starts, the shooting starts." Probably not the best. That's probably lost on a lot of people, especially the people that are protesting. But from my perspective, I thought that was extremely ill-advised, and he should not have sent that out. But as a result of Twitter's reaction to those two tweets, President Trump got fed up and signed an executive order calling for the Secretary of Commerce to file a petition with the FCC to request that regulations be implemented to clarify sections of the Communications Decency Act, which is that Section 230 that we've been hearing so much about lately, which allows online platforms to be free from liability for whatever gets posted. And another provision in this order is it directs the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to consider taking action on complaints of political bias on social media received by the White House, and also to take action on deceptive acts or practices in such cases. I think this is a slippery slope, because suppose President Trump loses in November and we end up with President Biden or whoever his VP running mate turns out to be, because they'll be running the show before too long. And social media already targets conservatives, already silenced. You look at a business for somebody on the left as opposed to somebody on the right, and their reach is far greater than the reach of, like my wife, like Carrie Girl. Her business is fantastic. But we know for a fact that her posts, her interactions with people online, it's all throttled. It's all throttled. Because you notice patterns where restrictions and throttling eases up and posts start to reach a lot more people over time, and then all of a sudden one post has something in it that they deem unworthy or unacceptable, and next thing you know, it's down to dozens of people see the post as opposed to the hundreds or thousands that were seeing it before. So we know this is true. So who's to say that if a leftist doesn't get into office, that won't get ratcheted up even more against conservatives as a result of this, because we're giving them the tools to do that. They already lie on us. So now with this, any leftist who doesn't like something we post, and I've already been to Facebook jail a couple of times, so I know any leftist complains about something I post on Facebook or Twitter, if they're in office with this executive order in place, I might as well just not even bother. So I think you should have left it alone. I think you should have let the free market play out a little longer. We'll see. Parler is out there. It's doing well. A lot more people are on it. So hopefully it'll take off, and then that'll render a lot of this moot. Until, of course, the leftists get a foothold and pervert it for their own ends and make it just as tough to operate on as it is on Twitter. I know the people who run Parler aren't like that, but government regulation could make it so that they have no choice. That's the tricky thing about using government to solve the problem, because when the tide turns and your guy's no longer in power, but that government regulation, that law that was put in place that was in your favor then, can very easily be turned around. And that's exactly what we don't want. That's why we want small government. I know there's a lot of conservatives out there that like this, and I don't get it. I do not get it. Because just like with the nuclear option in the Senate, when Harry Reid invoked the nuclear option, and Mitch McConnell told him, there's going to come a time when you're not going to be in power, and we're going to be able to use this the exact same way you did. And sure enough, next election cycle, boom, So we'll see, but I think he should have kept his powder dry and for something else, because this could turn out to be a very bad move down the line. Anyway, folks, that is our show. I do want to thank you all for listening. Check us out on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Like us, subscribe, leave a review. Check us out on the libertycast.net. Go to the homepage. All of the podcasts are right there. Check us out on therightway.site, therightway.site. Go to their podcast page and you'll find us there as well. But anyway, folks, I do want to thank you all for listening. And as usual, keep your head in a swivel and stay safe, everybody.